Well, the Detroit Lions got news that they didn't want to hear today, as their 29-year-old superstar center, Frank Ragnow, is officially calling it quits in the NFL. Their 29-year-old superstar has been phenomenal throughout his entire career. 7 years in the NFL, 4 Pro Bowls, 3 All-Pros with the second team, and really since entering the NFL has been one of the biggest and best people, players, and certainly centers in the NFL over the last half decade. One of the very few things that Matt Patricia left behind that was positive for Detroit. And unfortunately, he is no longer a Detroit Lion, prioritizing his future health, prioritizing his family, prioritizing just his mental and physical well-being over the game of football. And he put out a post that says, this is one of the toughest decisions that he's ever had to make, but he has to prioritize his health, his family, and his future. And that's really hard to be upset about. It's really hard to look at it and say, feel bitter about it, I guess is the right way to put it, because Frank Ragnow gave everything to the Detroit Lions. He played through a fractured throat. He played through several ankle, knee, foot injuries over the years, and really was one of the Lions' toughest players, one of their biggest leaders, one of their best players and most impactful guys on the team. And from a leadership standpoint, he was really impressive. Last season was not Frank Ragnow's best, but he was still one of the best centers in the league, getting an 85.3 PFF grade, ranking third in football, a 90.9 run blocking grade from Pro Football Focus while playing over 1,000 snaps, 7 penalties, and 2 sacks. From a pass blocking perspective, wasn't his best year, but far from a bad year. 2 sacks and 7 penalties still puts him as one of the best centers in the league, and he really did retire at the top of his game. The playoff game against the Commanders that they lost, Frank Ragnow was one of the best players on that team. A 74 Pro Football Focus grade, ranked third among all centers that weekend, an 81 pass blocking grade, and a 71 run blocking grade, all ranked third as well. He allowed 0 sacks, 0 penalties, and not even a single pressure against that really strong interior defensive line of the Washington Commanders. Frank Ragnow retired at the top of his game, and it is going to really hurt the Detroit Lions when he is gone. He was a player that a lot of Lions fans, and I'm sure a lot of Lions coaches, were expecting to be able to rely on. And all of a sudden now, with just a few months to go to the season, the Lions don't have a starting center. Now, we will get to that in a little bit, but what are the positives from this situation? Because as much as it's going to hurt to lose a team captain, to lose a superstar player, to lose a leader, to lose a veteran, and really to just lose the person that Frank Ragnow was with the team, there are some positives. In 2025 and 2026, Frank Ragnow's contract is now null and void. He had 0 guaranteed money left on his deal, which is likely a large reason as to why he did retire. There were no guarantees left, and he would have to play another 2 entire seasons, betting on himself not to get hurt, betting on himself not to miss time in order for that to continue to pay out. In 2015, he was about to make $14 million or 4.6% against the cap, and in 2026 that was going to jump to $16 million, about 5.5% of the projected cap for that year. Frank Ragnow is one of the highest paid centers in football, only behind Creed Humphrey, who makes 18, Cameron Jurgens, who makes 17, and the brand new Chicago Bear in Drew Dahlman, who makes 14. Frank Ragnow was at 13.5, and at the time of signing, he was the highest paid center in football. And he got paid early in his career. After being drafted in 2018, he played on a rookie deal from 2018, 2019, and 2020. In the 2020 offseason, the Detroit Lions extended their superstar, knowing he would only get better and he would only grow as a player. So they extended him right then and there. They forewent the last year of his rookie deal. They forewent the 5th-year option. And they said, hey, we're going to make you the highest paid center at your position at 26 years old. And that's what they did. Frank Ragnow was under that new contract from the very moment he signed it. And it was a really classy move by the Detroit Lions. It rewarded one of their star players for staying home. It rewarded Frank Ragnow for what he'd been through with the Matt Patricia era and what he was going to have to go through in Detroit during the Dan Campbell era. And they rewarded their star center with a really big and sizable contract. Now, the problem is that this season and next season, there was 0 guaranteed money. Frank Ragnow this year would be guaranteed a $9 million base salary, but if he didn't play, he wasn't going to get it. And the year after, it was about $12 million. So with incentives, it's nearly 10 to 12 to even $14 million a season that the Detroit Lions no longer have to pay. And while they certainly would be willing to pay it and certainly want to pay Frank Ragnow to play, that money can now go towards something else. That money could potentially now finance a guy like Trey Hendrickson. It could potentially finance another big star defensive player. It could finance the entire group that needs to be paid with Brian Branch, Jack Campbell, Jahmyr Gibbs, all Aiden Hutchinson and all of these other players that need big contracts, that's certainly going to help. That $16 million, $14 million over the next 2 seasons is going to clear things up quite a bit. And it actually makes the Lions cap space look significantly more favorable than it does just a few hours ago at this point. Now, we knew there were issues right away. Frank Ragnow sat out of ATAs, and we assumed it was because of injury concerns. We assumed it was because of the contract having no guaranteed money and that he was looking for a restructuring. With 2 years left on his deal, many people assumed that, especially with the Lions winning and especially the Lions being so close to a Super Bowl, Frank Ragnow could potentially at least play out the end of his contract, play through years 31, and just kind of be the Detroit Lions rock in the middle and give them sufficient time to find a replacement and find a backup. That unfortunately doesn't seem as though it is going to be the case. And without Frank Ragnow, the Detroit Lions have not been very good. Now, granted, they weren't very good with Frank Ragnow at the beginning of the Dan Campbell era, but the last time they were without Frank Ragnow was 2021. Ironically, the very first year under the brand new contract that he signed. Frank Ragnow played the first 4 games of the NFL season and went down with a season-ending injury. In that year, the Detroit Lions would finish 3-13-1. They would finish with the number 2 overall pick. They would finish with the 25th offense in terms of scoring points and the 22nd offense in terms of yardage. They would allow 35 sacks, which is the most sacks that a quarterback has ever taken since Frank Ragnow has been a member of the Detroit Lions, and it is the most sacks that Jared Goff had ever taken in his career. That season, Jared Goff missed a number of games because of the amount of sacks he took and because of the injuries he was facing, and the Detroit Lions finished the year really, really poorly. They were one of the worst franchises in football, and they already had people talking about Dan Campbell not being the right player in Detroit. That, of course, wasn't true. The Detroit Lions are now a juggernaut of an offense, and it was really headed by Frank Ragnow. The offensive line is still quite talented with Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell, Graham Glasgow, and some of the young players they brought in, but it is going to hurt without a guy like Frank Ragnow. So what is the solution? What do the Detroit Lions now have to pivot to? Because that player doesn't exist in free agency. There is no Frank Ragnow in free agency. There's not even a Graham Glasgow or a really true starting caliber player left in free agency for the Lions, because if they were, they'd already be on a football team. They'd already be starting somewhere in the NFL, and unfortunately, that player doesn't exist. Well, there are 3 options for the Lions at this point that are internal with the team. Graham Glasgow is, of course, the most obvious one. He played in place of Frank Ragnow when he did face his minor injuries over the last couple of seasons. He started the Monday Night Football game versus the Las Vegas Raiders on primetime television and was quite good. He has a connection with Jared Goff. He has a chemistry already there on the interior, and particularly with the guard draftees and the adjustments they've made on the interior, Graham Glasgow was at risk of losing his job anyway. He was at risk of having to fight with Christian Mahogany, having to fight with Tate Ratledge, having to fight with Miles Frazier, and really have to put up a good fight in order to win that battle. Now, if he switches over to center for the final year of his deal in Detroit, he's pretty much going to have that spot locked up. There's nobody there to compete with Graham Glasgow for that spot in Detroit. He's played center before. This isn't a one-time thing or a spot start where he did a pretty good job. He was well known for being the backup center. He's well known across the league as a versatile player that can do it. He did it at Michigan. He did it in Detroit the first time around. He did it in Denver, I believe, at least a few times. And he's certainly done it in Detroit a number of times since returning a few years ago. He is capable, he is available, and he has the chemistry, which I think is the most important. Having a center line up with a quarterback, know how they like to receive the ball, know just kind of the right way to do it with every individual quarterback is a very underrated skill for offensive linemen. And Graham Glasgow has the experience to do that. I think he is far and away the best option for the Detroit Lions. And even if it's not the perfect scenario, right, because there won't be, right? This scenario sucks for Detroit, and it really isn't good for the Lions offense. But I think the best way to salvage this is put in a center that's already under contract, is a veteran offensive lineman, has a leadership voice in the locker room, and has chemistry and experience snapping the football to Jared Goff in really running this offense from the interior in general. Another option is the second-round pick in Tate Ratledge. He was taking center snaps at rookie minicamp, potentially because the Detroit Lions knew this was on the horizon, potentially just to make sure that he's as versatile as could be in the NFL. But from what it was being said, he did a pretty good job for never taking snaps under center, for never snapping the football. He apparently did a really good job. Didn't have any, muffed fumbles, didn't have any bad snaps. He was a little, awkward getting out of his center stance, which is, of course, typical for a player that had never done it before. But from all reports, he was pretty good at it. And then, of course, there's Kingsley Eguakun, a player from last season who was an undrafted rookie free agent from the University of Florida, put up great numbers in the SEC over the last 2 years, is a little bit small, but super athletic from there, and played quite well in the preseason with, Hendon Hooker and the other backups there. And I think he's a potential option as well. So as down as this might feel, and it is, right? I don't want to downplay it and say the Lions will easily replace a player like Frank Ragnow. There isn't a Pro Bowler in free agency. There isn't an all-pro caliber talent in free agency. But the best thing the Lions could do is try to just minimize the damage that they're going to face. And I think that Graham Glasgow can minimize that damage. I think if you go into a season with an offensive line of Taylor Decker at left tackle, with Christian Mahogany at left guard, with Graham Glasgow at the center, Tate Ratledge at the right guard, and Penei Sewell at right tackle, that is still easily a top 5 offensive line in football. And I would argue still one of the top 3 offensive lines in football if we're really getting into it. This is still a good unit. The unit will be okay regardless of who they start. They won't start a player unless they feel confident that he is going to be able to do it. And again, at a worst case scenario, Graham Glasgow is a good center. At worst case scenario, he is a top 32 starting caliber center in football, and he's going to have great players on both sides of him to protect him, to help him, and to keep the Detroit Lions offense rolling like they were a season ago. So really sad news. Frank Ragnow is done. One of the best people, one of the best players, just one of the best personalities in Detroit sports over the last couple of years. He's loved by the team. He's loved by the fans. He's loved by the city. And I hope that everybody is respectful when he retires. And I know that it stinks, but it is something that he needed to take seriously. And I think that, unfortunately for the Lions, I think he's making the right decision. So with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Just a quick update talking about it. With all that being said, that's all I got for you right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.